The hidden teachings of Jesus finally revealed. Jesus understood a profound truth. If he spoke openly about the real essence of his message, the powers ruling this world would suppress it immediately. That's why he spoke in parables, stories cloaked in mystery, carrying hidden codes. These were his Trojan horses, smuggling eternal truths past the guards of corrupted power. Ironically, those in authority embraced his words without realizing that one day, the true meaning of these parables would expose their deceptions. This video is that moment of revelation. Through it, the hidden messages encrypted in Jesus' teachings will come to light, exposing those who have twisted his message for control. And as Jesus said in John 8:32, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." Once you understand this, you'll realize you've been living in a fabricated illusion, a world that only seems real. You weren't born into this world, you are the source of it. With every thought, every perception filtered through your mind and senses, you are constantly creating your version of reality. You're the architect, but you are not trapped. An alternate realm, a parallel dimension, exists alongside this one, just as vivid, just as real, and it's within your reach. Once certain energy centers in your body awaken, you'll be able to access this higher plane at will. Jesus called it the kingdom of heaven. What he practiced and passed on to a chosen few would later be known as Kundalini yoga. Not a religion, but a science of awakening. Religion begins when one person believes in another's divine experience. Yoga invites you to have your own. Yoga is a practice that is both scientific and systematic in its approach to experience the divine. Jesus was not a Jew, nor did he speak about any particular religion. He was a practitioner of yoga. He was referred to as a rabbi by the people of his time because he taught about the divine and explained where they were coming from, which was something that only rabbis did. The reason that Jesus was put to death was because he challenged the established order of authority in his time by arguing that the conventional method of worship was not an efficient means of encountering the divine. Jesus was a proponent of yoga, which is a holistic approach to experiencing the divine. The body that your consciousness is housed in comes with a mind, and the mind functions as a bottleneck in the capacity of the consciousness to make use of the brain during the process of consciousness. Mind really inhibits you from completely accessing your potential, which is a significant limitation. As long as you continue to use your mind to see the universe, you will never be able to comprehend who and what you are, nor will you be able to comprehend what you are capable of. This is no fault of your own because your consciousness was placed in a body that was not operating properly. Jesus said that you were born to sin, and this is precisely what happened. In reality, the world that you experience via your five senses and your thinking does not even matter. The intellect is responsible for its formation. Believing that you are the body and that the wants that the body develops for the outside world have something to give you is the act of sin. Due to the fact that your consciousness has only ever received information from the mind and the five senses during your entire life, you have the mistaken belief that this is who you are. However, if you were the mind, you could command it to cease thinking, and it would do precisely that. When you go to a movie theater, you are aware that what you are seeing is not real. Nonetheless, you still experience a roller coaster of emotions during the experience. This is because your endocrine system releases a variety of hormones depending on what you see, and it is all fiction. As soon as the movie is over, you walk out into the real world, and once again you experience a roller coaster of emotions. This is because your endocrine system produces more hormones, and the amount of hormones that are produced is determined by what your mind believes and sees from the real world. What exactly is the distinction? In the first illustration, the reality that you are witnessing is light that is being manifested through still photographs that are moving through the frame. The second illustration illustrates that the reality you are experiencing does not even exist until you make it by putting the light of your consciousness through the filter of your mind in the five senses. Your thoughts, which originate from your mind, are so potent that they exert pressure on the unmanifested, thereby producing all that you are currently experiencing. When your consciousness goes beyond the mind and the five senses and is revealed through the ajna chakra, also known as the third eye, you will experience and create a reality that is radically different from what you are familiar with. Jesus stated in Matthew 6:22 that the eye is the light that shines from within the body. Therefore, if your eye is single, your entire body will be filled with light. Nevertheless, if your eye is evil, your entire body will be filled with darkness. However, if the light that is within you is darkness, then the magnitude of that darkness is far greater. It is impossible for a man to serve two masters, because he will either dislike the first master and adore the second master, or he will be loyal to the first master and despise the second master. It is impossible to serve both God and mammon. When our consciousness is filtered via the lens of the mind and the five senses with two eyes, rather than our ajna chakra, also known as the third eye, thine eye or lone eye, Jesus is making it abundantly plain to us that we are committing a sin. Why is it that we are taught by religions that sin is the act of acting on the wants that the mind has? The message that Jesus is trying to convey is that depending on where your consciousness is located, you have the option of serving either the body or the divine. When Jesus peered out over the ocean through his opened ajna chakra, he saw energy that was vibrating, and because he himself was vibrating energy, he was able to walk on top of the water. In the same way that we perceive water when we stare at the ocean, the physical reality that our thoughts generate would be so overwhelming that we would drown if we sought to touch Jesus' feet with our third eye that was closed. The purpose of this documentary is to assist you in recognizing your own Christ consciousness, or the second coming of Christ. It is not true that Jesus will return. He has never left. Jesus said, "I say unto you that before Abraham was, I was." This is found in John 8:58. How is it possible that Jesus could have died with his body if he existed before his body? In the same manner that you are immortal, Jesus was and will continue to be timeless consciousness. One of the components of the Bible that is most frequently misunderstood is the concept of the second coming of Christ. This is what we mean when we talk about the second coming of Christ, you coming to recognize and obtain your Christ consciousness. Is there a way to accomplish this? You are loyal to the teachings of Jesus. It is said that Jesus was a yogi. In Matthew 11:29, Jesus said, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." This is a reference to the fact that these words were spoken by Jesus. It was Jesus' yoga that he was alluding to. Both the term yoke and the word yoga signify welcoming. What can be joined together your spirit, which is infused with your Christ consciousness, which enables you to connect with the consciousness of the universe. In conjunction with your asana chakra, your anahata chakra, you combine your knowledge with your heart. What are the steps involved in doing this? What Jesus did is what you do. The science of yoga is something that you study and practice. If you want to know what Jesus was doing between the ages of 13 and 30, you should ask a Catholic priest or a Christian pastor. Why is this time period during which Jesus went from being a young man with a very high level of intellectual ability to becoming Jesus Christ not included in the Bible? The majority of Jesus' life is completely absent from the Bible, despite the fact that he is considered by Christians to be the most significant life that has ever been lived. What makes this even possible? The question is, how did Jesus come to be enlightened? And what exactly was he doing while he was fasting in the desert for 40 days? During his teenage years and early 20s, Jesus traveled throughout India, Nepal, and Tibet to learn, practice, and teach yoga. He also taught yoga to others. The three sages from the East who came to pay him a visit were rishis from India. There is no nation that is referred to as the East. These realities are obscured by the Christian religions. Why is this the case? I don't see why they don't want you to know the real way to go to the divine. Jesus had the opportunity to renounce his teachings and return to his people, and if he did so, his life would be spared. He declined, stating that my body is absolutely meaningless to me. However, there are faiths that are named after him that utterly disregard his teachings, despite the fact that my teachings are the entire reason I am here today. The book of Revelation chapter 1 verse 12 states, "And I turned to see the voice that spoke with me, and as I turned I saw 7 golden candlesticks, and in the midst of the 7 candlesticks one like unto the Son of Man, and in his right hand 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp 2-edged sword, and his countenance was as the sun shineth in his strength." John, a follower of Jesus, witnessed the 7 chakras that Jesus possessed when Jesus revealed his actual form to him. In the book of Revelations chapter 120, Jesus told his disciples that the 7 candlesticks they saw were actually the 7 churches. In a church, what will you be doing? There is worship. The essential message buried beneath the traditional interpretation of Jesus' teachings is far more mystical and empowering than most modern doctrines reveal. At the heart of this deeper understanding is the recognition that Jesus was not simply a religious figure, but a master of a profound spiritual science, one that aligns closely with the ancient yogic traditions of India. Central to this hidden knowledge is the concept of the chakras or energy centers within the human body. Throughout the Bible, Jesus and other prophets refer to symbolic elements like candlesticks, seals, lamps, stars, and churches. While these metaphors have been interpreted religiously from a yogic perspective, they are clearly veiled references to the 7 chakras that yogis speak of, energetic points aligned along the spine that, when awakened, open the gateway to divine consciousness. Jesus' reference to being born again is not simply a metaphor for accepting faith, but a direct allusion to the spiritual rebirth achieved through the awakening of the Kundalini energy. This energy, described in yogic science as a coiled serpent at the base of the spine, must rise through the chakras, eventually reaching the crown, the Sahasrara chakra, in order for the soul to transcend body consciousness and enter the kingdom of God. When Jesus says that one must be born of water and spirit to enter this kingdom, he is describing the 2 essential stages: physical birth, the water, and the spiritual birth, the awakening of inner divine energy. In this light, the kingdom of heaven is not a place one goes after death, but a state of consciousness available to the spiritually awakened here and now. One of Jesus' most cryptic and powerful teachings is found in his parables. These were not simple moral stories, but spiritual codes, Trojan horses hiding transformative truths. Jesus understood that if he had spoken directly about Kundalini chakras, or divine union, the ruling religious and political powers would have silenced him, as these teachings would empower the individual and threaten institutional control. By embedding spiritual science within symbolic language, Jesus ensured that the wise would eventually decode his message when the time was right. The same parables that were once accepted by religious authorities now stand as keys to unraveling their own distortions and lies. Jesus' time in the wilderness, his references to the serpent, and the emphasis on lifting up the Son of Man mirror the yogic process of raising the Kundalini through the spine. Moses lifting the serpent in the desert is another clear allegory. The serpent, like the spine in yogic symbolism, must be lifted, activated, so that divine energy may ascend. Jesus' comparison to this act suggests that the Son of Man, or the divine essence within every person, must also rise to achieve eternal life. It is not belief alone that leads to salvation, but the inner transformation of consciousness, which Jesus exemplified. Furthermore, Jesus' relationship to figures like Elijah reveals a veiled acknowledgement of reincarnation. In scriptures, he states that Elijah has already come, and the people did not recognize him, a statement understood by his disciples to mean that John the Baptist was Elijah reincarnated. This directly aligns with the yogic view that the soul transmigrates through many lives until it attains liberation. It implies that Jesus himself was a reincarnation of a spiritually advanced soul, carrying forward the divine mission through multiple lifetimes, perfecting his consciousness in each. A critical misunderstanding propagated by many religious institutions is the deification of Jesus as uniquely divine, rather than seeing him as a perfected example of what all humans can become. By placing Jesus on an unreachable pedestal, institutions obscure the central message of his life, that we are all sons and daughters of God, and that through discipline, meditation, and inner work, we too can awaken to our divine nature. Jesus never intended to be worshipped for his uniqueness, but rather followed for his path, a path that leads to direct union with God. In John 14:12, he boldly states that those who believe in him will do even greater works than he did, emphasizing our potential rather than his exclusivity. This realization challenges the traditional belief in an external heaven or hell. Jesus taught that the kingdom of heaven is within a state of being, not a reward after death. When one lives through the mind and senses trapped in body consciousness, they are in hell, a place of suffering, duality, and illusion. But when one activates the chakras, raises the Kundalini, and perceives through the third eye, they experience heaven unity. peace, and direct communion with the divine. Hell and heaven are not cosmic judgments, but vibrational realities determined by one's inner state. This perspective redefines the purpose of spiritual life. Rather than obedience to doctrines, the goal is awakening the inner resurrection that Jesus modeled. The cross in this framework is not just an instrument of death, but a symbol of transformation, representing the crucifixion of the ego and the rebirth of spirit. True salvation is not achieved through belief, but through metamorphosis, through the stilling of the mind, balancing of energies, and rising of the divine current within. Jesus' mission was to illuminate this hidden path, to show that spiritual enlightenment is not reserved for the few, but is the destiny of every soul. His teachings align seamlessly with the yogic sciences developed over millennia, suggesting a shared spiritual truth beneath diverse cultural languages. Whether through Jesus' parables or the sutras of the yogis, the message is the same. The kingdom of God is here now within you, and you are meant to realize it in this very lifetime. At the heart of the mystical path that Jesus walked lies a profound understanding of human physiology, not in the medical sense, but in the energetic and spiritual sense long understood by yogic traditions. This ancient science of inner transformation is rooted in the body's bioelectrical system. Modern science has only scratched the surface of this, recognizing the brain and nervous system as electrical, but yoga dives deeper into the unseen channels, currents, and forces that power both body and consciousness. The spiritual physiology of yoga speaks of chakras, nadis, prana, and Kundalini, all energetic components of a divine architecture built into every human being. Jesus not only understood this system, but mastered it. His fasting in the desert, his healing miracles, his deep meditative states, and his resurrection are all reflections of a fully awakened spiritual physiology. Yoga teaches that the human body contains 7 primary chakras, energy centers aligned along the spine, from the base to the crown of the head. Each chakra corresponds not only to physical organs and hormonal glands, but to levels of consciousness. When these centers are blocked or unbalanced, we remain in limited body consciousness, driven by fear, desire, and duality. When awakened and aligned, they act as gates through which consciousness ascends, moving us from physical awareness to divine unity. These are not symbolic concepts. They are real physiological events observable through inner perception and increasingly supported by scientific studies on meditation and neuroplasticity. At the base of the spine lies the Muladhara chakra, the root center. Dormant within it is the coiled energy known as Kundalini. This energy is often depicted as a serpent because the spine through which this energy travels resembles a coiled snake. In the yogic path, the spiritual journey begins by activating this energy. It is the ignition of divine life force, which when awakened, rises up the central channel of the spine, known as the Sushumna Nadi. The Sushumna is flanked by 2 other energy channels, Ida and Pingala, correlating to the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. The alternation of breath through the nostrils, which happens naturally every few hours, reflects the shift in dominance between Ida, left nostril, cooling lunar energy, and Pingala, right nostril, heating solar energy. But the ultimate goal of yoga is to bring both these currents into balance so that the Sushumna opens, allowing Kundalini to rise unimpeded. This is where Kachari Mudra plays a vital role. It is a powerful yogic technique known as the King of Mudras. By placing the tongue up the nasal pharynx, a space most people never access, the practitioner completes an internal electrical circuit. This seemingly physical gesture has vast energetic consequences. It bridges the spinal current to the brainstem, which acts as the command center for unconscious bodily functions like respiration, digestion, and circulation. When this circuit is completed, the practitioner begins to override these autonomic systems, gradually attaining control over them, not by force, but by stilling the breath and mind through sustained practice. Kachari Mudra enables the practitioner to go breathless, a state known in yoga as Kevala Kumbhaka. This is not suffocation, but a deep suspension of breath, where the body becomes so energy efficient and harmonized that breathing becomes temporarily unnecessary. In this state, the mind quiets completely, for breath is the tether that anchors consciousness to the illusion of time. Without breath, thoughts fade, and what remains is pure awareness and entry into samadhi, or union with the divine. Jesus alluded to this practice when he said, "Enter through the narrow gate." The nasal pharynx, accessible through the tongue in Kachari Mudra, is that narrow passage, the straight gate into heaven. Moreover, this practice activates the pituitary and pineal glands located deep within the brain and associated with spiritual vision and higher consciousness. When stimulated by this redirected electrical flow, these glands secrete a sacred fluid referred to in different traditions as amritasoma, or even DMT in modern pharmacology. This fluid, collected in the sella turcica, a small cup-like bone structure, is often symbolized in esoteric Christianity as the Holy Grail. Drinking this inner nectar is not metaphorical. Advanced practitioners can taste a sweet elixir dripping down the throat during deep meditation. This is what Jesus referred to as the living water. And this is how yogis sustain long fasts without food or drink. Another critical element of this yogic physiology is the practice of bandhas, or locks. There are three main locks used to manipulate pranic flow in the body: Mula Bandha, root lock; Uddiyana Bandha, abdominal lock; and Jalandhara Bandha, throat lock. When combined, forming the Maha Bandha, or great lock, they serve to redirect the body's energy away from the lower centers and up toward the higher chakras. This coordinated effort builds internal pressure, intensifies prana, and eventually forces the Kundalini energy upward through the Sushumna. As the energy rises, each chakra it touches becomes awakened, releasing new levels of awareness, perception, and bliss. The mind, which yoga sees not as the self but as an instrument of the senses, begins to dissolve as these energy systems come online. Thought, which arises from imbalance and stimulation of the sensory organs, begins to lose its grip. This is how ego, the false identification with the body, is finally subdued. Jesus identified the egoic mind with Satan, saying, "Get behind me, Satan," when Peter tried to persuade him to avoid the cross. In yogic terms, the crucifixion is symbolic of transcending the mind and desires by stilling all sensory input and entering into pure awareness. All bodily sensations, pleasure, pain, desire, are electrical responses interpreted by the mind. But when energy is redirected internally through yogic techniques, the practitioner gains control over the source of these sensations. The mind is no longer the master, it becomes a tool. What results is not the end of sensation, but a transmutation of it, the awakening of inner bliss that is independent of external conditions. Ultimately, Jesus' resurrection, his fasting, his miracles, and his teachings on the kingdom of heaven all align with the advanced stages of yogic mastery. By purifying the nervous system, stilling the breath, activating inner elixirs, and raising consciousness through the chakras, the practitioner transcends physical limitations. Time, space, hunger, fear, and even death become irrelevant, not because of belief, but because of physiological transformation. Jesus demonstrated this not as myth, but as living science. In essence, the yogic path Jesus followed and taught is one of energetic precision and inner alchemy. It is the awakening of the divine current within the human body, a sacred technology coded into our physiology. And the miracle is not in the teachings themselves, but in the fact that every human being possesses this same divine blueprint. The body is the temple, the breath is the key, and the spine is the stairway to heaven. The question is not whether this power exists, but whether we are willing to activate it. Jesus did not come to be worshipped, but to show the way. The mind is one of the most misunderstood faculties in the human experience. In everyday life, we believe our thoughts are who we are. We identify so deeply with our inner dialogue that the voice in our head becomes our identity. But from both yogic science and Jesus' hidden teachings, this belief is revealed as the core illusion, the true source of suffering. The mind, particularly in its egoic aspect, is not the self. It is a tool, a processor of sensory information meant to serve consciousness. When the mind takes over as master, it creates a false sense of self rooted in body consciousness, leading us into duality, fear, desire, and confusion. Jesus addressed this directly when he referred to Satan. He was not speaking of an external red demon with horns, but of the internal force that resists divine truth, the ego. In Matthew 16:23, when Peter tries to dissuade Jesus from his path, Jesus says, "Get behind me, Satan," clarifying, "You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." This is not condemnation of Peter, but of the egoic mind operating through fear. In yoga, this ego is known as ahamkara, the force that says, "I am this body, I am these thoughts, I am separate." It is the mental factory of desire, resistance, and self-centered interpretation. The ego thrives on polarity, good versus evil, pleasure versus pain, success versus failure. It is the very architect of duality. Every desire it produces is an attempt to replicate an internal feeling of wholeness that it once glimpsed but now forgets how to access. And so the mind continuously creates distractions and cravings, falsely promising satisfaction through external fulfillment. Yet every time a desire is momentarily met, the peace we feel isn't from the object achieved, but from the temporary silence of the mind. This silence is our true self, pure awareness, love, and bliss. The tragedy is that we attribute the feeling to the external object, not to the stillness it created within. Yoga teaches that to access our true self, we must transcend the mind, not by fighting it, but by stilling it. Breath control, meditation, and internal focus weaken the mind's dominance. The more silent the mind becomes, the more the light of consciousness shines through. Jesus said, "Be still and know that I am God." Stillness is not merely an absence of noise, it is the gateway to the divine. The mind is the veil between man and God, and when that veil lifts, what remains is unity. Ego is not evil, but it is a distraction. Until we recognize the ego for what it is, a temporary lens, not the truth, we remain in spiritual amnesia. Jesus' mission was to awaken us from that forgetfulness. Yoga gives us the method to complete that awakening. Together, they point to the same truth: the mind is not who we are. Beyond it, we are divine. Spiritual liberation is the ultimate goal of every authentic mystical path, and it stands at the center of both Jesus' deeper teachings and the yogic sciences. It is the state of absolute freedom from illusion, the illusion of being merely a body, a name, a bundle of thoughts and emotions. It is the awakening from the dream of separation, where one realizes not only the presence of God, but one's oneness with the divine source. This is not a concept, not a belief. It is a direct experience born from inner transformation. And it is this experience that Jesus came to illuminate. The message of liberation is hidden beneath the surface of much of the New Testament. Jesus' statements such as, "The kingdom of God is within you," Luke 17:21, are not metaphors. They are literal instructions. He is telling us that heaven is not a distant realm we reach after death, but a dimension of consciousness available here and now once we turn inward. The tools he gave, fasting, prayer, silence, inner stillness, are practices designed to awaken this inner dimension. And in alignment with yoga, these practices point us toward activating and directing the internal energies that liberate the soul from bondage. Yoga teaches that we are not born free. We are born into a kind of spiritual sleep, identified with the body, ruled by the senses, and pulled by countless desires. This state is referred to as samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, where the soul forgets its true identity and becomes trapped in material illusions. The awakening of Kundalini, the opening of the chakras, and the stilling of the mind are not mystical hobbies. They are the actual mechanisms of spiritual liberation. Through these practices, the soul breaks free from the limitations of body consciousness and enters into samadhi, a sustained state of unity with God. Jesus' resurrection symbolizes this very awakening. It is not just a historical miracle, but a spiritual blueprint. The cross represents the crucifixion of ego and sensory attachment. The resurrection represents the rebirth of the divine self, liberated from time, fear, and death. When Jesus says, "I and the Father are one," he is not claiming exclusivity. He is demonstrating the potential of every human soul. He even confirms this when he states, "You will do even greater things than these." Liberation is not about worship, it's about realization. Not belief, but becoming. True liberation is not an escape from the world, but a reawakening within it. A liberated soul sees the world with new eyes, eyes unclouded by judgment or fear. Every tree, every face, every breath becomes infused with divinity. This is what it means to be reborn in the Spirit. Jesus didn't just point toward the kingdom, he embodied it, and he calls us to do the same. Spiritual liberation is not a reward for the few, but the birthright of all. The path is already within you. The choice to walk, it is yours. In truth, the path to spiritual liberation is not hidden. It lives within your very breath, your spine, your stillness. Jesus didn't come to be worshipped. He came to show you what is possible when you awaken your divine potential. The kingdom of heaven is not a place, it's a state of consciousness waiting to be realized within you. If this message resonates with something deep inside you, it's not by accident. You're being called to remember who you truly are. Begin the journey inward. Practice, seek, awaken. For more insights that unveil the mystical truths of ancient teachings and modern science, subscribe to this channel. Your awakening starts now.